Okay, so thanks. That was really interesting discussions for everybody. I'm going to now ask all of the speakers if they would mind coming back up to the stage for 2 minutes. Well, 20 minutes maybe. And we'll have a little bit of questions. Just grab a seat. Anyone? Yeah. And I'll open it up to the floor to start with. This is your opportunity to ask some questions. The talks were fascinating. I've made some points in no particular order, but if anybody wants to ask some questions, could you just raise your hand? And there's a roving mic there. If anybody wants to ask. But otherwise, maybe just to kick it off, I just wanted to ask, there was one point, I can't remember whose slide it was on now, but there was a point made about, the prize being massive. I can't remember whose slide that was on, just as one of the outcomes, the prize is massive. And that's one of the things that empirically I think we all believe, everybody that's here today as BIM coordinators and everybody who's in this sort of digital space and thinks that way. We believe that the prize is massive, but how do we demonstrate that? How do we show that? How do we actually explain that to people who are doubting Thomases still? I'm just wondering if anybody has any thoughts on that. So who would like to?
Hello? Oh, sorry. Okay. I would just argue that no organization yet has adopted BIM and gone backwards. So yes, the progress is slow and uneven, and some organizations will probably never join in, but I don't know of any organization that has adopted BIM and then gone backwards to the old ways of working. And that for me is enough, because it means that it's a one-way street. It's only getting to get more common.
Yeah. Absolutely. It is a challenge, I think, constantly to try and convince people that it's worth it. Yeah, carry on, Riccardo.
I totally agree, of course, with this. When I try to explain the client the value of digitalization or the effort, is always about, I think it was in your presentations, about efficiency and sustainability. Of course, this is the main aspect, but keep in mind that our sector, real estate, is like, I think, over 60% of the emission on CO2 comes from us, from the materials, from the industries and others. And ours is the only industry that never make a transformation with the point of digitalization instead of others. So this is really huge. And from my point of view, in the after construction phase, so the facility and the energy management, it costs at least like 70% of the entire life cycle cost of a building. So if you, for design a building, it costs 1%, for build it up 25, 30%. All the other costs are for maintenance. So of course, if you can create a system that help you during the years or decades to improve this, there's a lot of saving, of course.
Yeah, I can just add to that. I mean, I'm a great lover of technology, and that's why I work for a tech company. But I think some of the products we've seen, and particularly Riccardo's here, just demonstrate that's the value, seeing those benefits, the reduction of costs, reduction of time, and maintenance. That's a huge value to your building owners. So I think to me, that's the biggest kind of takeaway. This is why I've been in the BIM industry for a long time, but that's still the point I get, that I drive home to owners and customers to say, look, this is the benefit. It's going to reduce the costs, and you get the environmental benefits, energy saving benefits. It's win-win for everybody, as far as I'm concerned.
It is win-win for the owner, obviously. In the building, they get all this useful data and they get all this savings. But I suppose it's communicating that to the designers and the contractors, that they have to do something that isn't necessarily seen by them as being a benefit to them, but it's a benefit to someone else. And to see that they have a moral obligation, or really a professional obligation to provide this information. And that can be very challenging. I don't know whether anybody's figured out how to do that, but it's constantly a challenge for us. Yeah. So yeah, you want to?
this is a call for clients then, because they are the ones with the ultimate word in the end, right? So it's them who should actually request this information and make it happen. When we talk about data and cost on the entire life cycle, it's fun, especially now that we look at sustainability and carbon assessments, because we are lacking the data. We are trying to make decisions the best way we can, take assumptions based on data that is very poor. So I think that we are really losing a lot just because we don't have this data collected along the entire life cycle. Cost of maintenance, cost of build, it's a bit more, we are more aware of the cost of build, not so much of the cost of operating the buildings, and we are not really tracking that good enough to be usable.
And I think there's often a disconnect there between what we call the client. The client is not necessarily the building owner or the building operator. They may be building it and selling it, or building it and someone else is going to operate it, and really the client for the construction project sometimes isn't that interested in what happens post-construction. So getting that message, sorry, carry on.
I'm just going to make a last point. What Nick said is, I think who's adopted BIM never gone backwards, and there is something for everyone. So it's not client, it's not, and I think it's always used as an excuse because, oh yeah, they didn't ask me for data. Client doesn't ask me. I think it's all about looking at what it means for the business, and it's clear we're going to be procuring data, and if you don't provide the data, so the price is massive that your business won't sustain for long term. It's as simple as that. There's all these benefits, make more money. I think, that comes, but the fundamental is if you don't do it, then you just don't survive. And I don't think it's not if, it's when. I think it's here, it's happening. The procurement of data is going to happen, or is happening in some cases. So for me, I put up there price is massive from a perspective of if I want to sustain my business and be in sustainable business for another, 50 odd years, then you just have to do it,
Absolutely, very good point. I see a hand up down there. I don't know if you want to...
So one quick little comment there. I know firms who have adopted BIM, and I don't mean tried it out and screwed it up, but who have adopted BIM and gone back from it. So they are out there. They're few and far between, and I can talk with any of you later about that if you want, and like why that was a not terrible decision for them. I'm not sure it was the right decision, but not terrible. All of you have different data sets that you use, and every piece of each of your data sets is important stuff that we need to use. But none of you were talking about collaborative sets and data exchange. Like, we have clients who have existing BIM models that have come from different architecture firms that are not, they can't interoperate. We've had them like, hey, can we do anything with this? And like, well, it's kind of a hot mess. So all 5 of you have looked at different data sets that are useful individually to you, short of a cage match. How do we pick a data set that is interoperable? How do we find a set of data that we can actually use at scale for everybody in a way that actually allows that sharing that we need? Because when you sell a building, if they're on a different data set, that's useless data. That data goes away, like several of you pointed out, that we have to have continuity of data. We don't right now. How do we find that?
I just quickly react to the comment on that there are companies doing BIM going backwards. I mean, Catera used to say they do BIM. They don't. So that's probably answered the question. Second one, to your point around data, I think my only answer would use standards. Look at standards. You got open standards. If you use standard, then that's a good start. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's a good start.
I think my colleagues know what I'm going to say. The answer is IFC. There's no data that's been talked about today that couldn't be represented in the IFC already, including cost data. So, it's evolving. IFC 4.3 can do ports and harbors now, and roads and bridges and railways and so on. Tunnels come next year. They're always late. So the IFC can do it if we want to. So.
I'm going to add, from a cost perspective, obviously, we use ICMS International Cost Management Standard, in alignment with Building Smart, and therefore, also linked in a way or developed, aligned with IFC standards. So standards international, if possible.
Okay. Any other questions? No, I suppose this isn't much of a question, really, I suppose, in a way, but just when Elia was talking just about getting the QS involved all the way through, just from our experience, I suppose, the QSs don't want to actually do anything until the end of a stage where they get all the documentation, even if there's a model or model data. And I'm just wondering, how do we get through that? I mean, we were talking about breaking the logjam. I think that is a serious logjam on projects, that you can't get the QSs to engage earlier. I don't know if, what do I do?
It not only limits to get them involved earlier in the design stages. Now I'm going to bring into a more worrying topic, that is that quantity surveyors don't even want to get involved in BIM and digital. That's more worrying. We've heard multiple times from QS companies, but that's very expensive. We need to train everybody, and suddenly we need to start working with BIM models, and that's a huge risk for us. We don't want to invest on that. We'll wait for the big corporations to define it, and once they have sorted it out, trial and error, we'll jump in. Well, that will be too late, because first of all, educational programs are not training your professionals. So if you wait too late, how are you going to cover those positions? Yeah. And second, that's also a bit selfish. You cannot really make change and disrupt the entire industry by waiting for others to lead. That's a bit passive, and that's a bit of the same attitude we see when not having them involved in early stages or during the design process. It's like, well, design is not my responsibility, so I don't want to be involved in that. Well, success for the project is your responsibility, and if you don't do something to ensure the quality of the design for you to produce good quality of your delivery, you are, in a way, also a little responsible. Obviously, this is not the professionals and the quantity surveyors measuring and estimating. This is a message, of course, for the people that actually have the voice and the power to run these strategies in their companies.
And it is a logjam on projects, I think, because QSs tend to have the ear of the client more than the other consultants. For the architect, the engineers, they're seeing as spending the client's money, whereas the QS is supposed to be the guardian of that money and helping him control the money. But it doesn't seem to be happening.
Passively is not good, right?
Yeah, passive is not good. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions from anybody wants to ask? No? One of the things was mentioned there just about learning from failures, and I think that's a really good point. We do have to learn from failures, and we have to build on our experiences, and that's how we evolve as a species, really, by learning from the mistakes that we made and the advances that we make. But I think we're an industry that doesn't want to admit when we get things wrong. So, any tips for how we can tease that out of people and encourage people to admit to their failures? I mean, we for example, set up a user group for Revit users, trying to get people to come along and talk about, warts and all, really, about how their projects are going. And it's difficult. Everybody wants to tell, how good they're doing. They want to portray that we're the best, we're brilliant. But how to get them to admit? Yeah.
I think is a cultural aspect. So it's a aim of responsibility and. I really love when we talk about the CDE in this aspect. So the responsibility that everyone has upon their data. So basically that's it. So this is something that's really, really important for a cultural aspect, to raise your hand and say, okay, I messed up, I do something wrong. We work as a team together to try to solve this. But it's something I think is, in my experience and my culture, so it's really, really difficult. Maybe the more difficult thing to do is this, to admit you have make a mistake.
Yeah. Thanks, Riccardo. Okay. And it was fascinating to see what you're doing with the existing buildings, I think, because too much of the focus is on new buildings. And I think that's really where people will begin to see huge advantages in the post-construction stage of a project. So I thought that was really good and fascinating. Is the QS really dead as a profession? Or will it live on? Can we survive without QSs? Can we get rid of them?
Once again, sorry, I didn't get that.
Is the QS dead as a profession? Should we not have QSs
I think it is
anymore?
dead in the way we know it. And I want to believe that it will be reborn, but in a different way, in a way that brings more value than just being limited to measuring on the paper. And we will do a more in-depth work of validating the data, being the first stakeholders or the first people in the team that actually look across all the project material from different disciplines. Traditionally, it's just the very late stage when the quantity surveyor looks at it, produces the bill of quantities, and goes to the contractor. The contractor struggles with all these classes in the information and incongruences and mismatches, right? I want to believe that the quantity surveyor will be present and will solve this challenge in the industry by qualifying, validating the data, before it goes to tender, definitely. And and then by automating our processes and not spending time measuring, we also have more time to actually analyze the project, understand the project, be on top of the changes, and provide advice, feedback in time for the project to be optimized physically, but also, for operations, for smart decisions, before it's too late and actually too expensive to implement these changes in the design because we have gone too far away already. And, to revert it is time-consuming, and obviously you will find rejection or reluctancy from different stakeholders that they need to redo the work just because you had a very bright idea very late,
Very good. Yeah.
I think generally all the roles in the industry will change and evolve as new tools come in and digitization, etc. So we see all these softwares that do go for 1,000 options of architectural design in 20 seconds. That doesn't mean the architect's job's not valid anymore. It just means the roles are going to change. We're going to have to evolve. The whole industry will have to evolve to adopt new ways of working, and there'll be challenges involved with that.
The architects and engineers are quantifying now, you see, for us. So the role has evolved already.
Yep, absolutely. And I think it's... sorry, yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Is it working? Yes. Well, for me it's strange hearing this because in Spain, for example, the situation is the reverse. The quantity surveyor have been one of the first actors in implementing BIM, and the first master degree and postgraduate program, it has been held in one of the association of quantity surveyors in Barcelona. No? The same in Madrid, so they are very, very active in this sense. But I would add architects in this equation, no? Because with this new software about artificial intelligence, you can see that when you are planning some new construction in a plot, there is software that is making the same decision 10,000 times in order to give, with different requirements, the best position. No? So, in fact, I'm calling myself ex-architect. No? And this is because probably we are not accomplishing what is supposed that we are giving a better value for our society. No? But my question is more directed to Paul Surin and Nick Nisbet. We have organized the Building Digital Twin International Congress in May in Barcelona. And there was one room that was dedicated to privacy metrics and ethics. And this is also related with Riccardo, no? For example, when you are getting all of this information about one existing building and you have all the information of the users, but not only the ones that they want to give, but all of them, no? Because you have all their life that can be monitorized or can be extracted from any IoT devices, any air-conditioned machine, any lighting modem that we have, etc., etc., etc. No? And connecting this with the first question about standards, are we working in standards about how to use this privacy information, these metrics, and how we have to use this in an ethical way? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. There's even I've been involved in a work. I think it's the IEC ISO standardization work related to smart communities as well. So there is lots of existing standards. There is lots of standards around ethics, how data is shared, is not shared. So one thing I would also say is I've been involved in a project where you give you kind of give in a consent. You can decide what you share and don't share. So I think we've moved from that maybe where it used to be 10 years ago. So we moved there, and there are standards now which looking at things like smart communities, not smart cities, smart communities, OT security, which relates to your IoT, to your devices, how protocols have been followed. So I would say that's already probably in place in most of the time.
Yes, I think we need to think about it, because some of the big data mining companies are thinking about your address as being a rather clever proxy for gathering your information. So rather than collecting information about Nick, they collect information about 46 St. Margaret's Grove. And they think they can get under the wire of the GDPR. I've been doing some work with a social housing organization. And the first thing we do is because we have a lot of personal information about the tenants, but we turn it into profiles, generic profiles, that depending on whether it's a high occupancy house or sometimes it's empty or so on. So as fast as possible, we stop handling personal data and just make it into generic lifestyle things, so that we can then do the energy management for them and get them the best results. But it's a challenge, because I think it was Winston Churchill who said, we make buildings and then buildings make us. And there is a very close link between what we are and what the buildings around us and how we use the buildings around us are. And so we have to watch it, particularly with existing buildings and that kind of thing.
All right, thank you very much, everybody. We've just gone past 6 o'clock, so I'm going to say it's the end. So just say a big thank you to the 5 speakers. Absolutely excellent presentations today, and I hope you all enjoyed that. So just a round of applause for our speakers, please.